But then she wondered if a hunt might mean she got to eat some fresh meat. Perhaps they would be hunting deer or rabbit. If she had the choice, she would not want rabbit meat as much as she would want a rice cake made by a rabbit. An old fairy tale said the rabbit in the moon produced medicine with a mallet. That sounds taxing, for both you and whoever accompanies you. There is a great deal at work here, you see, and you wish to borrow my Maomao for this. Yes. Borrow her back. Gyokai's eyes glinted as they always did when she found something amusing. Does it really have to be Maomao? We have many perfectly nice girls here. No, I have told you I would like her back, and that is all. Perhaps Maomao was just imagining the sparks that seemed to fly between Jinchi and Gyokaiu, or maybe she was not. However, Maomao began fanning in place of Hongniang, who was becoming tired. Gyokaiu said, now I wonder which girl I should lend to you. I have already told you which girl I want. You simply need to give her back to me. Gyokaiu chortled merrily. You keep calling her and that girl. Yes, what about it? Jinchi said, a bit peeved. Say, Gaia-shun, what is it you call Maomao again? Gyokaiu inquired of the reticent attendant, unabashedly enjoying herself. Me ma'am, Zyaroma. Despite his serious demeanor, he called Maomao by quite a sweet nickname, Little Cat. In fact, he was such a soft touch that she'd sometimes known him to stop by the medical office just to play with the kitten. Gyokaiu looked back to Jinchi, seeing that her prey was cornered. So tell me, what do you normally call Maomao? Jinchi didn't say a word. Surely you don't just say Maomao. She won't know if you mean her or the cat. Jinchi, looking less and less comfortable, glanced in Maomao's direction. Now that she mentions it, I don't think he has ever once called me by my name. She had never noticed before. I did not really care. However, the extent of Jinchi's discomfort seemed strange to her. Hongniang jabbed her with an elbow, looking as if she wanted to say something, but Maomao did not know what it was. It took another half-hour of being needled by Gyokaiu before Jinchi got what he wanted. By then, Maomao's arms were tired from fanning. To the north of the capital was an important grain-producing region. A great river rolled from west to east. The landscape was dotted with towns and farming villages. In the south, people cultivated wetland rice. In the north, they grew wheat and jieliang, a type of sorghum. Farther north were forests, and beyond those forests were mountain ranges. North of the forest lay the territory of Shihoku-shu, which meant the Shi Northern Province. There, people began to leave the area directly controlled by the emperor. The region around the capital was known as Ka-shu or Ka Province. In addition to Ka Province, there were 3 other major provinces, along with a dozen or so smaller buffer territories between them. The name of the province suggested its role in events. Naturally, the official Shishu would come from Shihoku-shu. Is this making sense? Basin asked. He interrupted his lecture, delivering it in a somewhat self-important tone. He was a young man with a perpetually furrowed brow. He was perhaps a year or 2 older than Maomao. How did the nation's founding myth go again? Maomao thought to herself. The country in which she lived was called Li. The name was only a single simple character, but it told a whole sprawling story of national creation. At the top of the character were a few strokes representing a plant. Below that, the character for sword was repeated 3 times. The plant represented Ka, a name that literally meant blossom. It referred to the imperial ancestors, specifically to Wang Mu, the mother of the imperial line described in the old stories. The sword stood for men of martial valor. It was said that 3 warriors had accompanied Wang Mu, and that is why there are 3 swords in the country's name. Maomao seemed to recall that there had been many more annoyingly detailed stories to go along with this. She had been fighting back yawns the whole time she listened, so she did not remember them very well. She also remembered something about the swords' sizes. 2 of the swords were at the bottom of the character, and the other stood above them. The one on top was larger, while the 2 below were smaller. This explained why the emperor, who was usually very confident, could hardly look Shishu in the eye. The north, or the topmost sword domain, was summoning high officials to propose a long, relaxing hunt. It is true the emperor himself wasn't going, but many perfectly important people were. A warrior sitting across from Maomao was explaining all of this to her. Rattle, clatter, they were in a carriage and they were on the move. A horse-drawn carriage travelling at a leisurely pace could cover about 12 kilometers in the space of an hour. including rest periods and time to change horses. They had been traveling for half a day already. My butt is getting sore, Maomao thought. She wanted to reveal what she truly felt and suggest they fix things. However, she was glad to at least have a cushion to sit on. All of the others were in the same situation, so complaining would not help much. She looked silently out the window. Her hair was styled differently than usual, and it made her head feel heavy. Her shoulders slumped. If they were going to be on the road for a long time, they could have done her hair later. Getting from the capital to Shihokushu was not easy, whether at Shishu's invitation or not. It was too far away for a day trip or even an overnight journey. Shishu himself kept a residence in the capital. His family controlled the province of Shihokushu. They were one of the clans mentioned in the founding myth. Because of this, they had the weight of history behind them. However, the rumors one heard about them were less than favorable. After he had finished his run-through of this information, which interested Maomao hardly at all, Basin crossed his arms and fell silent. The subordinate officials with Basin looked tired. They knew they would all be stuck in the same carriage for the entire journey. They could not fall asleep, however. Despite his youth, Basin evidently held a rather high station. They could hardly nap in front of their superior officer. Jinshi and Gaoshun were at least in another carriage. A thread of drool was starting to dribble from Maomao's mouth, but that was just one of her charms. When Basin saw it, he clicked his tongue and said, "I do not know what my father sees in a girl like you." Father, that would explain why he looked so familiar. He must be Gaoshun's son. She was initially surprised by the idea that a eunuch like Gaoshun might have a son. However, upon reflection, she realized he hadn't been a eunuch from birth. Considering his age, it was not surprising he might have a few children. Soon, a lake bordered by buildings appeared outside the window. Basin uncrossed his arms, happy to have arrived, and his subordinates looked clearly relieved. Maomao rubbed her behind and watched the town approach absent-mindedly. Colourful buildings stood against a backdrop of mountains. There were waterways as well, and rows of large willow trees bending over flagstone paths. The buildings were reflected in the water as if in a mirror. The former emperor had visited this area every year. The altitude was high, which kept it cool, and many people used it as a place to escape the heat. In his final years, he had stopped coming. The current emperor also hadn't been here since his accession. However, the place was well looked after by the Shi clan. This job was made easier because they lived in the lands they governed. Maomao could see buildings even on the sides of the mountains. The houses were built like steps into the slope. They were arranged carefully so they would not detract from the scenery. The carriage stopped in front of one of the most splendid houses in the entire town. It was lavish enough to host visitors from the capital, people who were accustomed to every luxury. The three-story building had eye-catching red pillars. Its roof tiles were sculpted in the shapes of beasts. A moat ran around the mansion, filled with carp that looked like living damask. A black lacquered fence bore dragons and tigers. The craftsman must have carefully soldered them onto the fence. The decoration was unlike anything commonly seen in the capital. Maomao was studying it closely when she felt a jab in her side. She looked up and saw Basin glaring at her. She obediently fell into step behind him. As soon as they arrived at their rooms, Jinshi flounced onto the couch. His and Gaoshun's quarters were in the same building. On this occasion, it seemed Gaoshun was present as an invited guest. Maomao figured Basin was here as Jinshi's attendant. A rather stuffy-looking coloured cloth lay on the table. After a moment, Maomao realized it was a hood. I get it. It truly was a crime to be too beautiful. To think he had to wear a disguise for a journey like this, it was understandable. A simple smile from this man could stop the heart of an unsuspecting townsgirl. It was a troublesome face, it must be said. Judging by the layout of the house, the rooms they occupied were the finest available for receiving guests. The furniture and furnishings were more than suitable for even the most distinguished visitors. However, Maomao couldn't help noticing how hot the room was with the window closed and candles lit. She was about to loosen her collar, but then realized it wouldn't be appropriate. She would simply have to bear it. The makeup on her face felt like it was going to peel off. It was substantially thicker than normal. Jinshi had opened his shirt. Maomao took the liberty of looking at him. She hadn't seen him look like a squashed frog in quite a while. Gae-shan and Basin were the only others in the room with her, Jinchi. This seemed to make her think this show of leisure was acceptable. Were the shadows playing across Jinchi's face only caused by the candlelight? He looked more tired than usual. And here. What name shall I use? Basin asked Gae-shan. It was Jinchi who answered. Here in the room my usual one is fine. Outside, Kusen. Understood, Master Kusen. Maomao shot Gae-shan a puzzled look. Gae-shan stroked his chin and looked at Jinchi. Jinchi narrowed his eyes and looked at Maomao. Is there some strange plan afoot? Maomao inquired. Oh, it is, Gae-shan began, but Jinchi held up a hand to stop him. I should be the one to explain. As for you, hold your peace. Of course, sir, Gae-shan replied and almost physically withdrew from the conversation. This left Maomao perplexed. Am I right that Master Gae-shan and Master Jinchi are both present as guests on this occasion? Maomao said. Normally there was a somewhat more noticeable difference in their station. However, here they occupied the same building, even if they were in different rooms. For generations, the Ma clan has served Master Kusen's family, Basin said. Maomao couldn't explain the note of anger in his voice. His eyebrows were knitted together as if he were mentally working a puzzle. The expression looked exactly like Gae-shan's, so he is from good stock, Maomao thought, finding herself impressed. She shook her head, provoking further consternation from Basin. He trotted over to Gae-shan and said, Father, what is the meaning of this? Gae-shan looked troubled, then he looked at Jinchi. He pulled Basin by the arm over to a corner of the room and held a whispered conversation. Maomao could clearly see Basin's shock at whatever Gae-shan said. He seemed to argue, but without saying another word, Gae-shan simply smacked him on the head. Maomao wondered what they were doing, but she wasn't especially worried. She set about tidying up the luggage instead. If she didn't stick to the job, she would get a piece of Su-en's mind later. That attendant was fearsome, whether old or young. The hunt would be held the next day, so they would spend today at the mansion. An evening banquet took place in the garden. However, Jinchi and the others did not seem inclined to leave their rooms. They stayed indoors with the windows and doors shut tight. They passed the time by reading books or playing Go. The chambers were warm and stuffy, but they asked for ice to make things a little more bearable. A rider brought it to them from the ice house at full speed. This was truly a luxury, especially in the middle of summer. When Gae-shan saw Maomao looking at the ice with great envy, he kindly slipped a piece to her. She thought he was a truly thoughtful eunuch. Maomao personally believed they could solve many of their problems simply by opening the windows. Finally, unable to help herself, she asked, Why don't we open the windows? She had been asking Gae-shan, but it was Jinchi who answered. He instructed her to do the food tasting for their dinner. He looked frustrated as he added that then she would understand. Maomao was given a small sample plate of the dinner, and she tasted it just as she always did. There was a long pause. You see now? Jinchi asked, eyeing the sumptuous food but still looking exasperated. The dinner, which had been loaded onto a cart, appeared to include only the finest ingredients. Indeed, Maomao replied. Softshell turtle. The softshell turtle was renowned for never letting go once it had clamped its mouth onto something. Its blood was considered an aphrodisiac, and the meat could be presumed to have the same property. When Maomao tried a sip of the pre-dinner wine, she noticed that although it had been given some smoothness with fruit juice, the alcohol was actually quite stiff. It wasn't just the appetizers and the aperitif. The ingredients in the side dishes, the enter-e, and even the dessert all appeared calculated to make the eaters more energetic. Gae-shan dug through their luggage and produced some portable rations. They were going to have a modest dinner, even with the gorgeous food before them. Aren't you going to eat it? It's not poisoned, Maomao said. It may not be poisoned, but it's still not fit to eat, Jinchi replied. Actually, I am amazed you can keep such a straight face after eating that. He and Gae-shan were both looking at her as if they could not believe what they were seeing. In a corner of the room, Basin was boiling some water. And it was already so hot. It tastes wonderful. It would be suspicious if there were any leftovers, so you don't mind if I eat it, do you? Fine, if that's what you want. Jinchi pursed his lips as he looked at the thoroughly satisfied Maomao. She savoured another sip of turtle soup. Jinchi watched her closely. How is it? Is it good? It is. I do not have particularly fond memories of softshell turtles, but this I can live with. What do you mean memories? Jinchi asked. He picked up the tureen of soup, beginning to look interested. Oh, nothing important. Maomao had been in the habit of helping her adoptive father ever since she was little. That included going to market to buy ingredients for medicines. Once she ran into an unsavory character on one of these trips. He was an exhibitionist who had undone his belt and opened the front of his robe. He hadn't been wearing his skivvies. He seemed to show up especially often in winter, and she always wondered if he didn't get cold. Maomao, startled, had made to run away. In the process, she dropped the purchase she had been holding. It happened to be a live softshell turtle. Jinchi put down the tureen, a traumatized look in his eyes. He said, "Okay, enough, I don't need to hear any more." Gaeshun and Basin, father and son, had similar expressions. It seemed she had slipped up once again. The courtesans always enjoyed that story. It made her realize, as she set aside the empty plate, that she did not even speak the same language as those with better breeding. Still, what a waste of a good meal. There are plenty of good things here besides the turtle. Are you really not going to eat any of it? She urged the leftovers on them. It was far too much food for her to finish all by herself. There was no way that some dried meat reconstituted with hot water and dried boiled rice would sate 3 grown men. There must have been a meal sent to Gaeshun's room as well. Maomao supposed he had refrained from eating it because it had the same sorts of ingredients. "You're sure it's all right?" Jinchi ventured after a moment. "Be my guest. It would be such a waste to leave leftovers," Maomao thought. "You're absolutely sure," he said, staring intently at her. She was puzzled by his insistence. Then Gaeshun intervened with a series of small headshakes. Jinchi nodded reluctantly. "I don't need it. Basin, you are free to eat it. In fact, I order you to, if that is your wish, Master Kusan." Basin sat down like an obedient servant, and Maomao passed him a cup of wine. He drained the drink slowly. "Delicious. I'm glad to hear that," Jinchi said. However, Basin went completely still. A thin line of blood traced its way down from his nose. His face was bright red, and he appeared to be waging an internal struggle against something. Jinchi looked Basin in the face, and Basin shuddered. How, he asked, is this girl still upright? He was looking at Maomao with a truly terrible expression. It seemed he was fighting back a force welling up from within his body. He was leaning forward as if to conceal a very specific part of himself. The trials of youth. Maomao said she had no special reason. The answer was simply that this was her constitution. Basin was still struggling and tried to wobble his way to the next room, but he fell down. "Are you quite all right?" Maomao asked. "Just let him stay there." Jinchi said, "I will sleep in his room." The facing room was meant for his servant. It was less spacious than his own chamber, but large enough to sleep in. Gaeshun said, "Master Jinchi, I can help carry him to his room. I'm sure you are both tired." But sir, if Jinchi said so, there was little arguing. Gaeshun gave in and helped his son into the canopied bed. Maomao helped where she could. She thought Basin looked very hot, so she loosened his belt a little. His complexion improved after that. Unfortunately, blood from his nose got on the sheets. Jinchi slept in Basin's room. Maomao used the room across from Gaeshun's room. Gaeshun had shown some consideration by giving her a room all to herself. This room would normally house several people. The bodyguards who came with them stayed with Gaeshun. Maomao reflected that it was a luxury to have a room to herself. It even had a bath, so she was able to soak and relax. These were simple pleasures. Chapter 17, The Hunt, Part 1. The next day, Jinchi and the others rode off to the hunt. Jinchi wore his disguise, though he looked annoyed to have to do so. He continued to call himself Kusan, the name he appeared to be using for the duration. The disguise made sense. If someone who looked like Jinchi was wandering around, it would be a major distraction. This wasn't the palace, so nobody here knew he was a eunuch. However, with the incident at dinner still fresh in her mind, Maomao couldn't help but wonder what exactly the eunuch was hiding. She decided not to ask the question. She could only imagine what would have happened if Jinchi had mixed freely during mealtime. That explained why he kept the windows shut. Maomao followed the hunters in a carriage. The carriage also contained several household servants. It held firewood, soup pots, and an array of other cooking implements. They seemed to intend to cook whatever they caught right there. The carriage rattled past the Jieliang fields for about half an hour, and then the mountains came into view. After that, they travelled on foot up the slopes for another hour. They arrived at a house built on an elevation with an astonishing view. The green landscape was refreshing. Water could be heard in the distance, suggesting they were near a large waterfall. The servants, accustomed to this environment, began preparing a fire. Several of them went to fetch water with jugs. Maomao wondered if she should help. The other officials' entourages weren't lifting a finger. They had found a place under a canopy. Servants who had come early set up the canopy. The officials were chatting together. The noble members of the party would eat in a different location. Maomao thought it was probably safer not to do anything. People often did more harm than good when trying to help. This only earned the enmity of those around them.